$400,000. That is the net worth gap between two men. They started the exact same job on the exact same day at the exact same salary. Same title, roughly $140,000 to start. Same office, and their careers tracked almost identically for a decade. Both got promoted, both got married, and both had two kids. Neither one got lucky, and neither one inherited. Neither one earned, meaningfully, more than the other. They made 5 specific decisions at 5 specific moments. And each one sounded boring when it happened. If you are somewhere between 35 and 50, earning well into 6 figures, and you sometimes wonder why your bank account does not match your pay stub. This is the exact anatomy of that gap. Because it is almost never one big disaster that separates two high earners over a decade. It is 5 small forks in the road, where one person turns slightly right and the other kept walking straight. By the end, you will find the one fork costing you the most. And you can check it tonight in 15 minutes. Let me start with the fork that hides the most money, and it is not the one you would guess. Meet the two of them. We will call them Brian and Dan. Same age, early 40s now. Both are salaried professionals in a high-cost metro. Both married with 2 kids and a mortgage. Both maxing out the employer match on the company retirement plan. On paper, they are identical. And here is the part that is going to bother you. The biggest piece of their gap was not built by what Brian did brilliantly. It was built by what Dan simply never got around to. You might think the answer is a great investment, a side business, or a smart real estate move. It is none of those. It happened in the first 90 days of year 1, before either man had even learned where the good coffee was. Brian set his retirement contribution to the full legal maximum the day he started. Dan set his to the match, which was 6%, and told himself he would raise it when things calmed down. Things never calmed down. The gap between maxing out the plan and stopping at the match, for someone in their range, is roughly $15,000 a year of additional savings. $15,000 a year for 10 years is $150,000 in direct contributions alone. Add what that money earns sitting in the market over that decade, and Brian ends up with roughly $160,000 in his account. That simply does not exist in Dan's. That is the price of one afternoon of paperwork versus one afternoon of I will do it later. Let me say that again. $160,000 from a decision that took 15 minutes. That pattern where the decision feels small, but the tail is enormous, has a name. It is called the invisible fork. You only see it 10 years later when you compare 2 nearly identical lives. The second fork shows up every time the paycheck goes up. Both men got promoted twice in the decade. Dan's household income climbed from $1940 to about $210. Brian's did the same. The difference is what happened to each raise the month it landed. Dan's lifestyle absorbed almost every dollar. Bigger car payment, nicer vacations, a kitchen remodel. The kids into a private program. Vanguard research on high earners shows the typical professional household absorbs roughly 60 to 70 cents of every raised dollar into lifestyle. Within 12 months, that means out of a $20,000 raise, only about $6,000 ever actually reaches savings. Brian did one thing differently. Every time his paycheck went up, he increased his automatic savings transfer by half the raise amount before the new money ever hit checking. Over 10 years, 2 raises each. That single habit added roughly $90,000 to his side of the ledger. Same income, same lifestyle pressure, different plumbing. Here is a fair counterpoint. You might be thinking, Brian just lived more frugally. That is hard to do with 2 kids and a mortgage. Fair. And Dan's extra spending was not all waste. His house probably appreciated, and the experiences he gave his kids have real value. But does appreciation on a bigger house actually beat an automated savings engine running every month for 10 straight years? The math says no. It came from what was set up before the money arrived. Your numbers will vary by state tax rate, cost of living, and childcare situation, so run your own. Pause here, because we are only halfway. Those first 2 forks explain about $250,000 of the $400,000 gap. The next 2 are where most people have never actually looked. And in about 2 minutes, you will see why both of them are still open on your own accounts right now, which brings us to the company stock. And this one might hit close to home. Both men held stock from their employer. By year 5, it had grown to roughly 15% of their total investments. Dan did nothing. He liked the company, and the stock had been good to him. Have you ever logged into an account, seen one position that had quietly grown into a huge slice of the total, and told yourself you would deal with it later? Almost every high earner I know has had that exact moment. Brian had it too. He sold a portion every year on a schedule, paid the tax, and spread the money into broader investments. In year 8, the company's stock dropped about 40% over 6 months because of one bad product cycle. Dan lost around $70,000 of paper wealth. He never recovered at the same pace. Another invisible fork. Same pattern, different price tag. Work the math yourself. On a $300,000 investment account, a 15% position in a single stock is $45,000 exposed to one company's mistakes. A 40% drop on that is $18,000 of real dollars gone in 6 months. And a cycle like that rarely happens, only once over a full career. 2 of them in a decade, which is not unusual, and the damage compounds into the $70,000 Dan actually lost. By this point, you might be thinking Dan just had bad luck. He did not. What comes next happens silently, every single year, to people who never notice a bad quarter. Dan and Brian held the same mix of investments outside their retirement accounts. Dan held his bond funds in his regular brokerage and his stock funds inside his retirement plan. Brian did the opposite. Same investments, same total allocation, different containers. Bond interest gets taxed as ordinary income every year. Stock growth inside a retirement plan gets taxed as ordinary income when you eventually pull it out. That mismatch cost Dan an extra $1,200 to $2,000 a year in unnecessary tax. 10 years of that, plus what those extra dollars would have earned sitting in the market, is roughly $35,000 on Brian's side. Same money. Different container, $35,000. That is worth repeating once more. Same money, different container. Here is your 15-minute check for tonight. Open your brokerage and your retirement plan side by side and look at which funds sit in each. If your bonds are in the taxable account and your stock funds are in the retirement account, you just found the same fork Dan missed. Brian spent one Saturday on the 5th fork. Dan never got to it. That difference sounds small, and it is the quietest piece of the 400,000. The paperwork that says, who gets what? Brian filled out the who gets what forms on every account and signed a simple will. Dan never updated anything. Industry probate data tells a clear story here. A blank or outdated beneficiary line typically sends an account into court transfer. That process runs 9 to 18 months. Legal and delay costs usually eat 3 to 7% of the balance. On a $500,000 retirement account, that is $15,000 to $35,000. And more importantly, money your family cannot touch for a year. Add it up. 160, 90, 70, 35. Plus, a protection layer priced in court delays. $400,000. Built from 5 Saturdays. Here is what to do with this. The fork costing you the most right now is almost certainly the first one. The invisible fork, because its tail is the longest. So first, tonight, open your retirement account and check your contribution percentage. If it is set at the match and not the maximum, you have just found your biggest leak. And $160,000 is the shape of it. Second, the next time your paycheck goes up, move half the raise into automatic savings before the first deposit lands. Third, this weekend, pull up every account you own and write down who inherits each one. If any line is blank or lists a name from 10 years ago, fix that line before Monday. This is how the math works. Your numbers are yours to run. The gap between two identical careers is not built in one moment. It is built in 5 15-minute decisions you either made or did not. Now that you can see the forks behind you, here is what I want to explore next. These 5 decisions protected the money you already earned, but there is a completely different set of decisions that determines whether that money actually lasts through the 30 years you stop working. Same account balance on paper can fund very different retirements, depending on the order you pull from and the rate you burn. That is the next one.